I'm here to listen. Why am I walking on this way?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of Muse's AT Podcast, where you can relive my epic journey with me. This is Muse, and what follows is my Appalachian Trail story. In this episode, I'm going to read through 3 pre-trail entries covering the remainder of February and all of March. The March 2nd entry in particular is just one sentence. I don't think I ever did that again, but I guess we'll see. As far as where we are in the narrative, we're on the trail to the trail at this point. And today's haiku is from April 4th, 2025. A calmness descends while cascading rapidly into beginning. Before jumping into the entries, let's continue building out our trail glossary of terms with some of the things that we'll encounter today. One of the first things I say in the entry is that I've registered my hike with the Conservancy. So what is the Conservancy? The Conservancy is the ATC, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, formerly the Appalachian Trail Conference. The Appalachian Trail Conference was founded in 1925 to build the trail and was basically the governing body over the trail. And they changed their name in 2005 to the Appalachian Trail Conservancy to better align with their expanded mission, moving beyond just managing the footpath to a broader focus on protecting and conserving the entire trail corridor and its surrounding lands. It has always been a cooperative agreement with the National Park Service. The ATC is headquartered in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, where you get your Polaroid snapped with a little number written on it that indicates the order in which you came through Harpers Ferry, which is kind of neat as Harpers Ferry is kind of like a halfway point on the trail. In 2025, I was the 72nd Sobo going through. The next thing that we ought to define here is just a shuttle. A shuttle in its general definition is something that takes you from place to place. It is a common thing to be using on the trail. It's going to be taking you to or from trail, maybe into town, maybe to a hostel. I mentioned this in the upcoming entry as one of the benefits of the package that I bought with the Appalachian Trail Hostel. So that's what a shuttle is. I'm going to use some sort of a shuttle service fairly often on this trek, so you'll come to that one again. Another thing that I got from that package at the Appalachian Trail Hostel was called a shakedown. A lot of people might not know exactly what a shakedown is. A shakedown is kind of what it sounds like. They're going to have you empty your pack and go through item by item and make sure that it is something that you ought to be bringing on the trail. And in my hike, I had 2 shakedowns. I had this one in Millinocket at the Appalachian Trail Hostel, and I had another one at Shaw's in Munson, and that was hugely helpful. Basically, my first 2 trail stops on trail, well, I mean, Millinocket was before trail technically, but it was great. They went item by item, and really it was just, do you really need this? Do you not? It was always a question to me. It wasn't like anybody was like unequivocally, you must get rid of this or anything like that. And so in the end, it was just very helpful to get my pack weight down a little bit and make sure I was just bringing the stuff that I was going to use. The next thing I mentioned, and I mentioned it in the way of saying taking a zero, so a 0 or a 0 day, and we're going to encounter a lot of those. I took my fair share of zeros along the Appalachian Trail last year, but that is just going 0 miles that day. It's a rest day. I also talk about trail legs. Trail legs is the idea of your legs are just ready and accustomed to the trail. It is kind of funny how it works, though. It's like it just clicks. And one day you wake up and you're a hiker. Up until then, you've been practicing to be a hiker. And the way it's said on trail is that you got your trail legs. The last one, and maybe this is another one that everybody already kind of knew, but I do for the first time in this episode mention the term thru-hike. So what exactly is a thru-hike? Thru-hike is doing the entire Appalachian Trail or any other long trail, but in the scope of what we're talking about, the Appalachian Trail, doing the entire trail over the course of a calendar year. And a thru-hiker is a person who does the entire trail over the course of a calendar year. Okay, with that, we are ready for those entries. February 26th, 2025. Untitled. Pre-trail. Registered our hike with the Conservancy today. I think that's the last of the pre-hike logistics. A couple of weeks back, I mapped out our first few days to make sure we had a smooth start. We're flying into Bangor, Maine on Monday, June 2nd, and staying with the Appalachian Trail Lodge/Hostel for a couple of nights. I got their package that includes 2 nights, a shuttle service, a workshop, and a shakedown. I'm looking forward to this. I think it's a great way to check at the last minute whether we really have all our bases covered before we set off on the trail. And then we climb Katahdin on June 4th and stay in Baxter State Park that night. I booked 2 nights in Baxter State Park just in case we need a 0 after the climb. I understand it's pretty strenuous, and we will still be working on our trail legs after all. Haley and I have done a few backpacking weekends to prepare. The picture with this entry is from back in 2023 when we hiked Pilot Mountain. Our most recent outing was back in December when we took advantage of 20-degree weather to make sure that we were well prepared for possible colder nights. We did really well, and in general, I think we've got our gear dialed in pretty nicely. A couple more small purchases, and we both need to buy a couple pair of shoes, but otherwise pretty much ready to go. Another element of prep has been making sure I leave work well. On April 25th, I am terminating my employment rather than taking a leave of absence. But honestly, I've had a great work situation there and also want to continue those relationships, both on professional terms and because I've made great friendships. So it was important for me to do it right. I've actually been replaced at work since mid-November, my situation being favorable enough that I could raise it quite early that I was leaving. A few details remain, but those are on track, so I can look forward to April and more importantly June, knowing that I did well. March 2nd, 2025. 3 months to go. Pre-trail. 3 months from now, Haley and I will be flying up to Bangor, Maine to get started. March 22nd, 2025. Untitled. Pre-trail. Talked to Johnny O yesterday. He told me it's been 17 years to the day since Pacer started his thru-hike. I'd been considering for a while giving Pacer a shout out here. It's a little odd because I've never met him, but Pacer, if you ever read this, I feel like I know you. I read through your whole journal on this platform and it certainly added inspiration, so thank you. And thanks to John for sharing that journal. Needless to say, it's how I got introduced to this site and inspired to start my own. Another update, I got my shoes. 3 pairs of Ultra Trail Runners, the first a pair of Timp 3s and then 2 pair of Timp 5s. Hoping to get about 700 miles from each pair, we'll see how that goes. Hey everyone, this is the part of the episode between the entry and the commentary, where as the podcast develops, I'll drop in an ad or two to get the bills paid. Nothing too intrusive, hopefully, and maybe if we're lucky, we'll pick up some trail-related sponsors. At this point, though, I thought I'd write an ad of my own and read it out. What I'm selling today is simply a plea to get in touch with me. I'll say it in the body of some of the episodes, but probably sometimes I won't, but I really do want to connect. Not only would I love feedback, truly, and am itching to field a question or two, but I also would love to hear your trail stories. This podcast is my way, post-trail, of connecting back with the AT community. Whether you're reliving past glory like I am on this show, prepping for an upcoming hike, or maybe you're on the trail here in 2026, or maybe you're just someone who likes hiking content or in particular the Appalachian Trail, whatever brings you here, I'd love to get to know you. So reach out on Instagram by following Muse Hikes, or email me at museatpodcast@gmail.com. Or another cool way to get in touch, and I'll start getting back to checking this regularly, is to drop a note in my trail journal if you click through to that. The trail journal has pictures with each journal entry, and sometimes I'll refer directly to the picture in the entry as I read it out, so you might want to see that. And I'll also share some photos on that Instagram account as well. There are links to the Instagram profile, the email, and the trail journal in the show notes to each episode. Whichever way you decide to reach out, I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And now, back to the show. All right, what I want to do in this episode is talk a little bit about pre-trail Joe, not even Muse yet. That happened on trail, of course, as I mentioned in the last episode. So who is this person that came to this adventure? And you may recall it was said kind of in passing in the first episode, I actually first decided to do a thru-hike back in 2018. So let's talk in this episode a little bit about what brought me to that decision in 2018 and kind of a little bit about what the path from 2018 to 2025 looks like. But before we do that, I want to pick a few things out of these entries for today. And then actually, before we even do that, let's talk for a minute about this haiku. So the haiku, just kind of quickly read it again. I won't be quite as dramatic as the first time, but a calmness descends while cascading rapidly into beginning. And this is it's going to be a theme over at least the next couple of episodes. because you'll get this whole calmness thing, but then now we're going crazy and cascading rapidly, but then we're calm again. I think the haiku that's going to be in episode 4 is going to talk about a whirlwind, right? So what's going on? Why is it this roller coaster? This haiku was written on April 4th, which puts it exactly 3 weeks before I quit work. And that whole journey, it was interesting, and it's fun to look back on it because at one point I gave like 5 years notice, but even more immediately I gave at least like a year's notice and started signaling to my boss, hey, we got to get me replaced. And so we kind of scrambled to get me replaced as quickly as possible so that I could kind of data dump onto my replacement everything that I'd done in the past 6 years. Right around the beginning of April, that was all kind of resolving. There was stuff I even had to develop and everything. Like, I was just running hard until the beginning of April. And that was just kind of resolving to where my replacement just knew what he needed to do. And he was just, hitting all the beats that he needed to hit. And I was kind of just able to take that sort of deep breath. So that's where our calmness really comes from. Plus, as you heard in the entries, a lot of the logistics were happening in February and March. And we'll get to that in just a minute. So there was actually a little bit of a calmness there as well because I wasn't into the last minute trail prep yet. And because that would be in May, and May would be that whirlwind we're talking about. But I had also already done a lot of the sort of early prep, if you will. So it's kind of an interesting sort of roller coaster that led me from basically February on through June. In the entry, you get to hear a little bit about the logistics. I talked about registering with the Conservancy. I talked about booking the Appalachian Trail Lodge and Hostel, and I talked about booking Baxter State Park. First of all, the first thing that had to fall into place was Baxter because they have a 4-month rolling reservation system. So given that I was planning a June 4th start, I wanted to start talking to Baxter pretty much the beginning of February, which is why in the February entry I had already done that. And then once I knew I could get a reservation, then I started kind of putting everything else in place. But what was really cool about this was how helpful everybody was. The folks at Baxter gave me recommendations. I started getting recommendations going back and forth with Trash Panda from the Appalachian Trail Hostel. And just starting to put the logistics in place really just kind of solidified a lot of what I needed to do in, call it April and May, right? So those entries are February and March. The other notable thing in this entry is just that we meet Johnny O and Pacer. And you hear in the entry that Pacer is the guy who gave me the inspiration to write my journal daily in the first place. I actually was introduced to trail journals by Johnny O, who was a colleague at work. And he was like, yeah, a while ago, my friend did the Appalachian Trail, and he wrote a great journal, and it really was a great journal. I read it all the way through, which is why by the time I got to March 22nd, I felt like I knew this guy. Nice thing is, as you heard in episode 1, I did get to meet him, which was really cool, but it was one of, I would have to say, sort of the prep things that I was doing. As things became public at work, I got this shared with me. And then I read all the way through this daily journal. And then I was like, well, I'm going to do it this way because it was just an awesome way to keep people up to date at home. And there were a lot of people that were following that on at least a relatively daily basis. I would get actually kind of pinged every now and then. Hey, you haven't written in a while. Let's see an update. And that was always really cool to get. Kind of got me more excited. All right. So grounding things in 2018, I'm going to talk for just a second here. It comes up in a future entry, so I know we'll talk about it again, about the Taco Bell announcement, right? So I was sitting at work, must have been a slow day at work. I was looking up Appalachian Trail stuff that afternoon and just kind of getting inspired over the course of a couple of hours and met Carrie and the kids, who were pretty little at this time, because we're talking about 2018. I guess Evan was, I guess Evan was 12. They weren't that little. But I met them at Taco Bell, and that's where I made the announcement. I was like, hey guys, I'm going to thru hike the Appalachian Trail. And of course, that came out of complete nowhere, right? They had no idea that I'd ever thought about this. And I think maybe I had searched it a couple of days leading up to that, but at least a week prior to that, I had never even thought about it, right? So of course it was out of left field for them. So first, why in 2018 did I really kind of need to do something big? 2018, let's talk career again for just a second. This would have to be a spot in my career that I felt a little bit stagnant, and I was working awfully hard to feel stagnant as well. So I do have to say initial push might have been out of a little bit of frustration. It's fair to say that. But then where does hiking come in, right? And to talk about that, what I really have to do is go back into my scouting career a little bit. And I say scouting career, like my time as a scout leader, right? So this would be supporting Evan through his scout journey. And it's funny that my scout leader profile, if you will, kind of followed the same general profile as my scouting as a youth, which was funny because I went through all of Cub Scouts, got into Boy Scouts, and ended up not making very far in Boy Scouts. I don't know, it wasn't for me anymore, right? That kind of ended up becoming what I did as a scout leader as well, hugely involved in the Cub Scout years. But as the son of an involved leader crosses over into the troop, there's kind of an expectation that that leader will kind of cross over with him. And I'm glad that some people do that. Otherwise, the whole thing would fall apart. But for our family, the right thing to do was to kind of let Evan fly on his own. So this was a little bit intentional, to be honest. And he did fly. Evan went on to get his Eagle, and it worked out really well. But ended up with this profile where, as a leader, where I was really involved in Cub Scouts, and I'm talking like running district campouts and serving on the district committee, like really involved. And then I think a lot of people were probably pretty disappointed when I didn't want to get all that involved in the troop. My stepping back from scouting was really 2017. So actually, I'm just kind of thinking about this now as I'm standing behind the mic, but wondering if that might have created a little bit of hole as well that I might have been trying to fill when I was starting to muse over the Appalachian Trail. But why it's also important to this narrative to reflect on all of that, one of the things that happened during Cub Scouts, not only did I get all this outdoor training and everything, so I was definitely into like camping, which had previously been more of maybe a passing interest, maybe a fancy, if anything. But now I had sort of some hands-on skills there and some events I would go to and everything. But then specifically hiking, Evan's Cub Scout pack had this great hiking program, which was very unique to this one Cub Scout pack. And it was really cool because the kids, they would earn a hiking stick, and then they would earn these medallions. And I'm actually, as I'm recording here, I'm holding Evan's hiking stick in my hand, and he'd get a medallion every 10 miles. So he's got all these medallions on here, and it's really cool. So he actually had 100 hiking miles by the time he turned 11. And it's, I don't know, kind of hard not to sort of catch the bug there, right? So this is something, as we get to 2018, and Evan was 12 years old, something I hadn't really done for a little while, something I looked back fondly upon, both great times with my son and my family, and also great friends that I met along the way during that journey. And I guess as it was the convergence of that sort of work, sort of frustration, feeling of stagnation, and then just this, that outdoor stuff was really great, right? So that had me just thinking Appalachian Trail. It's something I knew about, but barely, which is why I was Googling it. And there's the 2018 inspiration. So then what is prep leading up to really the stuff I was doing in February of 2025, right? And it comes down to a lot of reading, a lot of consuming media. I talked about Pacer's Trail Journal. That was kind of a key inspiration giver, and a bit of information there too. I mean, I didn't know about some of the features and stuff like that of the trail that I was, dreaming about hiking until I read that, and that was really cool. And then as I'm doing more research, I already know in the back of my mind, because I read from Pacer, I'm looking forward to, Mahoosuc Notch or the Lemon Squeezer or any of these things that you'll hear as you follow me on this Appalachian Trail journey once I'm on trail. But that was kind of late, actually, because that wasn't until after I went public at work, right? So that's like 2024 that I started reading that. Prior to that, Carrie's buying me books. That was huge. There were 2 books in particular that I read 3 or 4 times each. And the first one I'm going to mention here, it was simply called How to Hike the Appalachian Trail. A gentleman by the name of Chris Cage. It was a great book. And this was all very much the logistics. Like, what does it even look like, right? He was actually a southbound hiker himself, Chris Cage was, although he wrote the book Northbound just because, as you'll come to learn, the northbounders really outnumber the southbounders by quite a bit, right? So he wrote it Northbound just to kind of help more people with it, which is what he was kind of doing. He was also, through that book, working to promote his company that he started after he did his thru-hike, which was a meal bar company, Green Belly Meals, which is, I had those on trail and they were great. We'll get into that a little bit more. And I was consuming some of his other YouTube content as well late in my preparation, really into 2025, really, as we're talking about that. And then as we get to talking about the media that I consume on trail, which is something that I have planned to do, because that is a whole evolution that's going to be kind of fun to follow. As we get talking about that, you'll hear that, I was looking at some Green Belly videos while I was in this, trail town or that trail town. And the other one is a book by a gentleman by the name of Zach Davis, who was a northbound thru hiker. And this would have been in the early 2010s. I'm thinking 2011 or 2012 that Mr. Davis thru hiked. But his book was especially good to read because it was kind of the mental preparation. How do you prepare mentally and emotionally for a thru hike? We're actually going to get into that a bit deeper in just a few episodes, because one of the last pre-trail entries that I wrote was kind of my list of whys, right? And that came from Zach Davis's book. It was an exercise from that book. And I'll mention that again in that episode, of course. One of the other things I did was I watched A Walk in the Woods. I watched that once with Haley and Evan and a second time with Carrie as it was getting really close. And that was interesting. I hadn't read it. I actually never did read it until I was on trail. That was one of the audiobooks I listened to. But that's the sort of thing I was mostly doing during that time. And I was acquiring gear over the time. And we'll talk a little bit about my gear selection as I got close to the trail. So we'll definitely do that. But the topic of acquiring gear really dovetails into a piece of the journey between 2018 and 2025 that I absolutely can't leave out. We talked a lot about scouting before, but within Evan's Boy Scout times, I did dip into scouting one more time. And this was the 2022 Philmont trek that Evan and I did with his Boy Scout troop. That was huge, both as Appalachian Trail prep, and it was just a great experience anyway. Philmont does a wonderful job. Basically, you have the rigors of a multi-day hike, but then you've got all this entertainment and everything. Like, everybody on their staff has an interest in something they're doing, like one of their activities, like blacksmithing or whatever. They also are all like professional musicians as well, right? So you're on these campfires that you're getting totally entertained. You're getting your miles in. It was just kind of awesome. For me, prepping for Philmont was also prepping for the AT, because I went to Philmont in 2022. Of course, I knew I was going on the Appalachian Trail in 2025, which actually brings up an evolution there, because when I talked about it in 2018, my original vision was 2026 for whatever reason, I decided I needed to put it out 8 years. So sometimes I'll slip and still say there was 8 years of prep. So if I do that, just know that that's what's going on. It ended up being 7 years. It got pushed up a year because Haley says she wanted to join me in between her undergrad and grad school. And the whole vision really evolved quite a bit anyway. My initial, the Taco Bell announcement was like, oh, Carrie, you'll come with me on the trail, and Haley, you can look out after our stuff because you'll be out of school, and Evan, you'll be in college, so I don't know, visit us sometime or whatever, but your parents are going on this trail. Well, Carrie just didn't really want to, and some of that for very practical reasons, like the family should still have health insurance, and maybe a little bit of money coming in would help me make the journey, right? So Carrie opted instead to support me from home, which of course I'm very grateful for. Meantime, Haley, right around the time she graduated high school, which would have been 2021, she kind of said, hey, Dad, would it be pretty cool if I came with you? So ended up shifting to 2025 because she graduated college in 2025 and wanted to do this between undergrad and grad school. And so that leads us probably about to where the entries are. I kind of wandered a little bit there, kind of did a little bit off the cuff, but hopefully you got a good sense of who it is that's bringing himself to this trail experience. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for coming back for episode 2. It is awesome to have you back. Please follow and subscribe in the podcast app of your choice so you get the notifications when I drop new episodes. Reach out to me on Instagram at Muse Hikes or email me at museatpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, this has been Muse. Thank you for walking with me and happy trails.